much. Thank you for helping make this all go smoothly. I'm really excited about this plenary session today. So thank you to everybody who's coming or coming in. We don't have a common notes, but you're certainly welcome to put thoughts in the chat, especially if you have any questions. I'm thinking we do want to get to our panel at the end. So each of our presenters will talk for a few minutes, and then we'll bring it all together for your questions and panel. So certainly type your questions, but then we'll address them at the very end in the panel. We are focusing on some of those challenging problems with implementing FAIR, and really maybe thinking about it as opportunities as each of our communities is stepping forward with new policies and roadmaps to help us and our colleagues move forward with more fair, more open data and software. And so we have three groups of speakers talking. Our first is from ARDC, and I'll introduce Keith in just a moment, and then to be followed by the US Geological Survey, and then the National Institutes for Health. So Keith Russell, many of you, of course, know Keith. He's the manager of engagements and expertise at the Australian Research Data Commons. He and I are co-chairs of the Fair Data Maturity Model Working Group, along with Edith Herzog. And ARDC has made some significant investments and efforts around implementing FAIR policy and guidance and training and assessment tools. And Keith, if you want to get started, it would be great to hear how things are going there. Yep, looks good.
Excellent, great. So thank you very much for the opportunity to speak here. So my name is indeed Keith Russell, Manager Engagements and Expertise at the Australian Research Data Commons. First of all, before I go any further, I would like to acknowledge and celebrate the first Australians on the traditional lands we meet, or through the airwaves we present. So for me, that's the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation here in Melbourne. And I would like to pay my respects to the elders past, present. So first of all, just to provide a little bit of perspective, and this is especially for people that don't know the Australian Research Data Commons. So the Australian Research Data Commons is a national organisation funded by the Australian government to provide research infrastructure. Now, there's a bunch of organisations like us in Australia. We're all funded under the NCRIS program. The reason I'm highlighting this, you'll see a little later in my presentation. But what these facilities do is they provide research infrastructure that is not at the level of a university, but at the national level. And some of these are facilities that like microscopes and telescopes that are just not viable to run at a university level. And some of them are address challenges which are at a national level. So the Australian Research Data Commons focuses on data, and our purpose is to provide Australian researchers with competitive advantage through data. So what we are aiming to do is to accelerate the research and innovation by driving excellence in the creation, analysis, and retention of high quality data assets. So it is all about those data assets, but we would do a lot of work in the infrastructure around the creation of those assets. So think of the research platforms for researchers to produce those assets, work around compute and storage, and providing services around compute and storage for researchers to create those data assets, but also to be able to share those data assets. And we provide guidance and support around making sure that the data becomes available so that a researcher can publish it, but also that other researchers can reuse the data and build upon that data. So that comes back to Shelley's point earlier about open science. So as ARDC was working on this, and we've been around for a while, we realized that the FAIR principles were extremely useful and very helpful as a way of thinking about how high quality data assets could be shared in a meaningful way, especially in a way that enables other researchers to pick them up and benefit from them in this data intensive future. So think about making the data fully AI ready. So over the many years, over the years we've been working on this, we've picked up the FAIR principles and we've been starting to do a number of activities incrementally around FAIR. And some of this was building on the work of the predecessors, ANS, Nectar and RDS, and some of this actually came through during the emergence of ARDC. So one of the things we set up was a policy, an internal policy within the Australian Research Data Commons about, well, what does FAIR mean for us? How do we understand FAIR? What does it mean for the way we operate? And in that policy, we talk about making our own research products, our own products fair and available so that other people can reuse them. And we also talk about FAIR for the fairness of materials that are produced in the co-investment partnerships we run. So that was a very helpful starting point to get a shared understanding just purely within the organization about what FAIR is and what that means for us. And just to be clear, just to show a clear commitment to FAIR. Now, we are not the only organization in Australia that cares about FAIR. There's a whole range of other organizations that care about it and look at it from different perspectives. So we are involved in an ongoing national alignment in a range of different forums and meetings with a number of peak bodies and research funders around, well, what does FAIR mean in practice, who's doing what, who's doing which part of the awareness raising, and ensuring that there's alignment in getting the message across and taking actions in that space. So, and that includes organizations like the Department of Education, like the peak body for university libraries, the peak body for research offices, etc. As we were working on FAIR, one of the first steps we took was just purely to try and raise awareness around what does FAIR mean, and try and get a better, try and provide some basic guidance materials on FAIR, that FAIR is actually more than just the 4 letters, and there are some underlying thoughts behind it. One of the most helpful tools in that regard turned out to be a self-assessment tool that we developed, and that was used by a lot of organizations just to try and find out, well, what does it mean to truly make a data set fair, and what are the things you need to have in place? One of the other things we already had in place and we have continued to build upon is providing national level services to enable researchers to make their data fair. So think of things like identifier services, persistent identifier services, national discovery services, a service that runs a national vocabulary service, etc. And we provide the expertise alongside these services when people want to implement these and use these. Another aspect of FAIR is, of course, it's not a puzzle that one person can solve on their own, and each person in each organization is often trying to solve parts of the puzzle. So having national communities that relate to aspects of FAIR, we found really helpful to try and untangle specific challenges that are coming up for organizations. So for example, we have communities around sensitive data. What does sensitive data mean? We have a number of communities around different identifiers. How do you implement those? How do you use those in practice, etc. As I mentioned earlier, in our policy, we also raised some expectations about what we expect of partners in our co-investment partnerships. And we've made those explicit in a list of expectations that we provide to partners. But rather than just providing it as a list of expectations and say, congratulations, we expect you to do this, we also have a guided workshop that goes alongside that, in which we work through them, work with them. We work through these expectations and say, well, what does this mean in practice? What do you already have in place? Where are there areas you'd like to focus on? What are achievable goals? And trying to map that out and work through the different aspects. And if, for example, they need ARDC services to achieve some of those goals, helping them to get access to those services and actually implement those services. Now, when FAIR first came up, it was very much about data and FAIR data, but we're now involved in leading a number of discussions to broaden that out and see what that means for other research objects, digital objects. And so one of the discussions we're having is with a national research platforms community. So when we say platforms, we mean places where researchers can come and analyze their data, virtual places. So with that research platform community, we're trying to figure out what does it mean to make your to ensure that your platform enables FAIR? What are the aspects you need to, what are the aspects you need to incorporate in your platform? And another discussion we are involved in, and we are very actively pursuing, is the what does FAIR software look like? Because the FAIR principles for data are actually a little bit different to the FAIR principles for software. So trying to untangle that and trying to get agreement on that was very important to us. And rather than trying to do that in Australia, we said, well, that's something we definitely want to do internationally. And the FAIR for Research Software working group here in Research Data Alliance is perfect for that. So we're actively engaged in that, looking forward to the outputs of that working group. So there's one thing I wanted to highlight in particular, and I thought it would be an interesting, timely example to bring into the mix. And this shows that when engaging with different organizations, you need different angles of attack and different approaches. So as we've been looking at FAIR in the national landscape, you notice that different stakeholders and players need to be involved to achieve the goals. You can't just go to a researcher and say, oh, I'm expecting you to make your data fair. You actually need to have a whole range of other organizations on board to play a role in that puzzle. Now, one of those key organizations that plays a role in that puzzle, in Australia at least, are the research infrastructure organizations, fellow NCRIS facilities, just like ARDC. So we've reached out to these fellow NCRIS facilities and said, well, can we work with you to better untangle what it means for a research infrastructure facility to enable researchers to make their data fair? So these facilities themselves will not be making the data fair in most cases, but what they will do is they will support researchers so that the researcher can make their data fair. So the angle is slightly different. And what we've developed there is a series of two half-day workshops. And in the first workshop, we just work through with them, what does actually the FAIR principles mean in a bit more detail. And we do that in very much in a self-evaluation fashion, so people can self-assess where they think they're at and where there are areas where they would like to make improvement. And then on the second day, we translate that. So this is usually, we leave a little time in between for people to digest. And then we run a second half-day workshop. In that second half-day workshop, we say, that's great, all very well. In that first day, you said that you wanted to do more persistent identifiers, but actually, what are the changes you need to make in your organization to get there? And that can be actually might involve a whole range of different changes. So that could be changes at the policy level, changes in your procedures, changes in the required infrastructure, maybe even changes in staff guidance, researcher training, or user agreements. So we worked through each of those aspects and said, that's wonderful, but turning FAIR into practice actually requires changes at a whole range of different levels. So doing these workshops has been really interesting and really fun, but also quite complex, because these research infrastructure facilities actually do different things and they play different roles in the data lifecycle. So you need to untangle a little better which aspects that specific research infrastructure facility covers. And then to add an extra level of complexity, these research infrastructure facilities actually often consist of several nodes, and these nodes do different things. So the conversations you're having is with a range of different facilities that are talking about different aspects. So it's been a really fun journey, and it's been really useful in untangling what they can do to enable researchers to make their data fair, and what are the changes they can make. So just summing up, I'd like to say, I think implementing FAIR across the whole country, looking at all the different stakeholders, it's quite complex, and it requires a lot of people to play a lot of people to each play a role, and those roles can be quite different. So I think I'm going to be missing a webinar because it's in the middle of the night by the Dutch research funder NWL, and the title of that, I love that title of that webinar. It's called "It Takes a Village." So it's FAIR, it takes a village to actually achieve those changes, and I think that was a lovely way of describing how you need to get everybody on board to get FAIR up and running. So thank you.
That's perfect. And it's such a great segue coming into the village that USGS has been building. because it truly does take a village. So let me introduce to you, there we have three folks from USGS tonight, so the US Geological Survey. So starting with Viv Hutchinson, she's the branch chief for the science data management in the Science Analytics and Synthesis program. And she also is a representative for the Department of Interior on the federal data strategy. It was very meaningful within the US. Leslie she coordinates the USGS community for data integration. She is the village, she's like a village governor, I think is a good way of saying it. It takes a village. Leslie is the governor of the village. And she brings together those earth science researchers, technology, information management, in order to create the supportive community and try to figure out what it means to implement things and highlight all of the work that's happening across that broad community. And they're joined by Fran Lightsome. Now, I think Fran somehow got the long stick and she won't be speaking. However, or maybe she is speaking, I don't know, Viv will have to tell us. But Fran has been instrumental in building this FAIR data roadmap. And one of the really neat things that I have just tripped upon when she's self-describing herself is the professional calling to make scientific information available to the world so that people can make wiser choices about how to live. I love that. And it's really a passion for Fran, and I've seen it firsthand. So Viv, are you starting us out?
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
And see
And
my
the slide good. Yep.
Okay, fantastic. Well, thank you, Shelley, and it's really a great honor to be here. Fran Lightsome and I are leading a project to develop a roadmap for the US Geological Survey in the United States for enabling FAIR data. And the team also includes others, Linda DeBrewer, Dave Gavani, Natalie Tisch, Wade Bishop, and Shelley Stahl, actually. So I just wanted to mention all the wonderful people that helped us in this project. The U.S. Geological Survey is a bureau within the United States Department of the Interior, and we're focused on the natural sciences, including water and biology, energy and minerals, and hazards. And our mission is to provide unbiased, reliable scientific research to other scientists, decision makers, policymakers, and the public. Much of the progress to date in terms of USGS alignment with the FAIR principles has resulted from recent federal policies focused on open and accessible scientific data. And those overarching policies include Foundations for Evidence-Based Policymaking Act of 2018, 2013 Office of Science and Technology Policy Memorandum, which was increasing access to the results of federally funded scientific research, and a 2013 Making Federal Government Information Open and Machine Readable, which resulted in a 2016 US Geological Survey Public Access Plan. The USGS has made significant progress in advancing US federal directives for more open and accessible science. And we've published a public access plan. We've established some data management policies as part of our USGS fundamental science practices. We've made repositories and other data management and release tools available for scientists. And we've engaged in our community in establishing best practices and processes to manage data as a critical asset. So the culture at USGS is changing to recognize the importance of FAIR and transparent data practices in science, really. However, we knew we could do more. So the USGS hosts a community of practice called the Community for Data Integration. And in 2019, this community funded the FAIR Roadmap Project to improve USGS alignment with FAIR principles through policies and practices and infrastructure. And the project convened a broadly representative workshop and produced a roadmap to enable FAIR at USGS. And you'll hear more about CDI in just a moment from the coordinator, Leslie Shee. But the project was broader than just the workshop, however. So we set out to examine the current application of USGS FAIR principles. We identified critical gaps and recommended steps to enable broader implementation of FAIR. And we did this by surveying USGS data producers, analyzed the use cases of projects that integrate data, We collected USGS-wide perspectives at the workshop, and we did a big process of publishing a report that includes 88 recommendations, which have been grouped into 9 strategies to improve FAIR in the USGS. So the 9 strategies are grouped into 3 action areas. The strategies that focus on enabling improvements to individual data products focus on persistent identifiers, identify research products, including physical samples for automated discovery and access, and that metadata are machine actionable to improve data discovery and reuse, and that research methods generate interoperable and reusable data. And then the strategies recommending administrative activities to support an organizational culture that values FAIR include employee incentives, improve the production of FAIR aligned data. Research, development, and participation in professional communities helps improve capabilities that align with the FAIR principles. And culture change achieved through knowledge exchange encourages activities and techniques that improve alignment with FAIR. And then lastly, the strategies that will provide or improve infrastructure include repositories and data systems provide discovery and access through unified compatible methods. And vocabulary services improve discovery and evaluation of fitness for use, and policy requirements improve consistency of products. And so with that, we have some next steps to publish the FAIR roadmap. It's currently in management review at the U.S. Geological Survey. We want to make materials available through the CDI to support working groups that are moving us towards FAIR. We want to develop a FAIR knowledge base for the USGS, and we want to establish a FAIR coordination council to support working groups that are helping us move towards FAIR. And lastly, we want to be able to visualize and track progress by sharing the FAIR recommendations in Tableau. So I appreciate the opportunity, and now you're going to hear more from Leslie Shee, who runs the Community for Data Integration. So Leslie.
Thank you, Viv. Okay, I have a few slides here to talk about how the CDI supported and supports the process of FAIR implementation at the USGS. If you go to the next slide, please. So first, to just describe what the CDI is, the Community for Data Integration is a community of practice and a forum for stewarding the knowledge needed for working with earth science data. It has been growing since it was formed in 2010 and now has a very diverse group of over 2,000 scientists, data practitioners, managers, software developers, and other professionals who want to grow their expertise in working with data and want to communicate across geographic and disciplinary boundaries to make progress on their work. The 4 main activities that the CDI facilitates are monthly virtual meetings, smaller, more targeted collaboration areas, an annual request for proposals process, and workshops and trainings. And you'll see how all 4 of these activities have had some part in the FAIR implementation at USGS. Next slide, please. So the CDI request for proposals process, including a phase for community discussion, helped to develop the FAIR Roadmap Workshop idea. In 2019, it was one of 33 statements of interest submitted to the process. Every year, the CDI offers seed funding to support projects that are focused on data integration for interdisciplinary research, innovative data management, and exploration of new technologies. 2-page statements of interest are made available to the entire community so that they can be commented on. They're presented in a lightning talk session and then open to commenting and voting from any CDI member. Commenting revealed collaborators or ongoing work that could be leveraged, showed enthusiasm about this idea from community members, and also led to statements like, the process of increasing fairness is going to be a challenging combination of technical problems and organizational change problems. So community voting advanced the FAIR Roadmap proposal to the full proposal stage, where a review panel provided additional tips for improvement, such as making sure the proposed workshop included a large fraction of scientists in addition to the data practitioners, warning that the workshop had to be inclusive and not just a discussion just among those who already agreed. Next, please. So luckily, the review panel and CDI executive sponsors selected this proposal. During and after the project period, the CDI provided a broader platform for communication, including a final project presentation to the CDI virtual monthly meeting, sessions at our biennial workshops in both 2019 and 2021 to give updates on the project, inclusion in our annual activity reports, and importantly, the chance to find more FAIR ambassadors or nodes for further communication into their own networks and communities. So next, please. So to finish up, I'll just try to make a couple observations about what worked well about using the community. First, the existing community of colleagues in CDI proposed and refined the idea, and they were used to talking amongst each other to try to refine their ideas. Second, because the project was supported, it allowed the initial team to recruit more enthusiasts and build upon that first community. And finally, the implementation of FAIR involves many moving parts in the USGS. So even if some things take time, getting started is the first step before these initiatives can grow and take flight. So thank you. I guess this concludes the USGS presentation, and we'll look forward to the discussion.
Leslie and Viv and Fran, who somehow, again, got the long stick. Thank you very, very much. It's the village continues. The village idea and inclusiveness and communication and people all matter. And so now to come over to our friends at the National Institutes for Health. Susan Gregorick is the Associate Director for Data Science and the Director of the Office of Data Science Strategy at the National Institute for Health, and is leading the implementation of NIH's Strategic Data for Data Science. And I will let her take it away. It is getting there. And flip your modes, please. Perfect. That's great. Thanks, Susan. And you happen to be on mute in case that might be a useful thing to adjust. Do you want me to unmute you? I might be able to unmute. Oh, there it is. Okay, very
so
good.
Do you still see everything okay?
You came out of presentation mode. There
we go. I got to flip it again. Sorry about that. I have two screens and I toggle between them, but that doesn't make it easy sometimes.
No, it does not. You are looking very good right now. Carry on.
Awesome. Well, good evening for us here in Bethesda, Maryland, and good morning for those, and good afternoon for those who are in other places. I wish we could all be together, but at least I'm glad that we're here in the virtual world. Perhaps at the next RDA, we will all be together, and that would be fantastic. I'm glad to, I think I might be the last speaker before the panel, so I'm sort of glad to wrap it up in terms, if that's the case, in terms of what NIH is doing to implement the policies and to really create fair data and trust ecosystems. This has been a fabulous RDA meeting thus far. Enjoyed the sessions that I've participated in. So I'm not going to be able to talk about everything that we're doing because that would take a lot of time. But I just hope to touch lightly on how we can instantiate and enhance creating fair data from data that we already are generating, creating more repository trustworthiness, robustness, and then really meeting the policy for NIH in terms of data management and data sharing. So this is the policy. We just have a little over a year to go before it will go into effect, requiring all NIH investigators to prospectively plan for how their data, their scientific data, will be preserved and shared by submitting a data management and sharing plan at the time of their application, whether you're an R01 applicant, or you're applying for a big center grant. We anticipate that you will submit a plan outlining how your data and any accompanying metadata would be managed and shared, and taking into account any types of potential restrictions or limitations that data may have. And we anticipate that this will be part of the budget justification section for our extramural awardees, or part of the technical evaluation for contracts going forward. And although it will not be scored, it will be certainly looked at by reviewers and absolutely looked at by NIH staff. So this applies to all research funded or conducted at NIH, including our intramural research programs. The only exclusions would be for research activities that do not generate scientific data, which would also include our training activities, our infrastructure development activities, and our non-research activities. But by and large, most people at NIH who are applying for awards would be submitting a data management sharing plan and getting ready for that plan and really instantiating fair data practices and principles in real world applications is, I think, what brings us all here today. So let me just tell you a little bit about what we've started to do at NIH across our institutes and centers to improve the data that we are already generating and have generated to make it more fair ready and AI ready. And we know that it's a really difficult task. It's not a simple formulaic task. It requires engagement and feedback with researchers, and often it's use case driven. There are aspects of data such as the representation of the information, or the presence of noise, or the uncertainty of the metadata, or just the limited amount of data, are all challenges in preparing fair and AI ready data. And in addition, there's the documentation of the data, its provenance, any attention to bias in data. These are all components of creating fair and AI ready data. And so thinking about how can we take the data that we have generated or that we are generating and now start to think about creating fair data is something we've started doing this past year in support of collaborations to bring expertise together from biomedicine and clinical sciences and basic biological sciences, all supported by NIH, but those that are managing data in computer science for artificial intelligence and machine learning to help make supported NIH data AI and fair ready. Through this supplemental NOSI, we have awarded 36 awards this past year, and you'll see some of the statistics here. And also some of the common focal areas, predominantly in Alzheimer's disease, in cardiovascular disease, and in aging. And interesting, some of the data types that researchers were interested in making fair and AI ready. Not surprising, imaging did float up to one of our more prevalent data types, but also electronic healthcare records, genomics, transcriptomics, proteomics, metabolomics, and even speech data, which really did surprise me. It was that I did not expect. So what did researchers want to do? What were some of their key areas for creating more fair and AI-ready data? Some activities won't surprise you. Deep learning for automated image segmentation, that was a key component of many of the imaging applications. Using machine learning to convert data into formats that would be much more efficient and effective for large data storage and handling of the data and its analysis, particularly when in the cloud. Using transfer learning to sort of de-identify data and assist annotators. Using semantic techniques to create machine-readable metadata. Actually, this is a really popular component of a number of applications. One application that I found interesting was the use of out-of-distribution detection to basically impugn missing data or data gaps from existing data at different time points. There was other types of imputation strategies like multivariate analysis, and then methods to sort of combine human and AI to basically improve existing models for image classification, so combined human in the loop applications. New methods to create machine-readable metadata and documentation for curation and cleaning. This was popular in our large data repository applications. Harmonization tools to remove unwanted artifacts and noise. And then other ways to streamline the curation of data and improve metadata descriptive elements. So these are just many of the types of research that researchers wanted to initiate in order to create fair and AI-ready data from existing data. And I think it's worth actually thinking about the existing data that we have and how to leapfrog this into more fair and more AI-ready, rather than throwing the data away and trying to recreate it in other ways. So it's an investment in time and hopefully an investment in new algorithms and new capabilities for fair, ready data. But this is just one side of the story. The other side is thinking about the repositories, where the data will go, will be shared, will be reused and managed. And there is really no one size fits all data repository or knowledge base. They come in different sizes, different complexities, and absolutely different levels of maturity. And each has a unique value that they bring to a given research area. Thinking about the spectrum of data repositories and knowledge bases that we are funding, and their ability to adopt quickly to the FAIR principles and also the trust principles, calling out in particular RDA's work and Dawei Lin and others, to create repositories that are transparent, responsible, have a user focus, have a sustainability plan, and adopt ready technologies is important for NIH and for the community. Moreover, developing metrics for the evaluation of the usage, utility, and impact of these particular repositories is also important, and it's an evolving function. There's also no community-defined metrics. It's something that we are working on. And how are we working on this and supporting fair data repositories and trustworthy data repositories? This past year, through a partnership with a number of institutes and centers, we supported supplemental funding for existing NIH-supported repositories to enhance those fair data principles and create trustworthy capabilities, as well as potentially a core trust seal capabilities and other work to improve their own user utility and impact measurements and metrics. There are a number of institutes and centers who are participating with us, and you'll see the number of awards that we made. And I want to call out in particular that this is not just a program for the extramural community. This is a program for all of NIH, and we did include awards to 5 intramural repositories as well. So let me show you the repositories that we have funded and basically where they're working in this space. And you'll see the institutes listed on the far left-hand corner, and it does span a number of scientific domains and institutes. The PI, the main PI, their institution, and then the topic. Are they working to create better, fair, capable data? Are they working towards those trust principles? Are they creating metrics for usability and utility and impact? And then the repository, and what's wonderful about this is that it spans many different types of domain sciences, from genomics to craniofacial data, to all sorts of types of data. And at the very bottom are the institutes that are from our intramural community. For example, the Digestive and Kidney Disease Central Repository and IDDK-CR, the Chemical Effects of Biological Systems Data Repository at NIEHS and others. So this is something that I think we're going to work with the community and potentially continue in the future. These 2 activities really do support creating fair data and trustworthy repositories. If you'd like to see all of the repositories that promote open data sharing, the resource on the Biomedical Informatics Coordination Community, BMIC, website listed at the bottom will list out for you the open domain-specific data sharing repositories, as well as the generalist repositories. And I think, if you're looking for a data repository that will accept your data and you'd like to learn more about those data repositories, this is a great go-to website. And there are other activities that are happening around NIH to help researchers gain awareness of the different types of repositories for data sharing, including our activities in the Helping End Addiction Long-Term Heal program and some of their work with their PIs, which I'd just like to raise awareness about. And finally, if you're interested in seeing how the institutes and centers at NIH are supporting data science activities and supporting data reuse as funded by their researchers, I'd like to invite you to attend our data sharing and reuse seminar each month, a different institute or center will highlight a funded PI in their work in data sharing. And so on November 19th, we'll be hosting Alexander Ropoliski from Pittsburgh Supercomputing Center, who is going to talk about the Brain Imaging Library. And the host of this seminar is the National Institutes of Mental Health. There's a website, which I unfortunately did not link here, where you can see past recordings of other seminars from other institutes and centers. It does take an ecosystem, and it's so wonderful to be a part of that effort and to be here today to talk about fair data and data sharing. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing, I think.
Susan, thank you so much. That is tremendous. What an enormous amount of information. So we have a very short 20 minutes left. I know there are about 1 million questions everybody has. Because we're just finishing up with Susan's talk, Claudia has a quick question, Susan. When you're talking about supporting repositories, how much funding, and Claudia comes from FAPESB in Brazil, so she comes from a funding institute, just to give you some orientation. How much funding is involved, and what would be a typical, for your ODSS projects, what would be typical grant values for that?
Okay, that's a great question. So for ODSS, the total budget last year for all of data science that we support, which is catalytic trans NIH data sciences, was 55 million. For the repositories that we supported, the NOSI, the funding was, I believe, around $250,000 to $300,000. But that's just for our component. The total budget of those repositories really is very broad because they're funded primarily through institutes and centers, and the funding can range anywhere from a couple $1 million down to $500,000 or so. So in writ large, NIH supports, at the last time I did the pool of the information, it was about 300 million total in data resources, not just repositories, but in knowledge bases and core centers. So it's a pretty big part of our budget, but in comparison to a $30 billion budget, when there could be certainly more support.
I think it really resonates the fact that when the repository is an important resource for the researcher, and they are instrumental in making sure that data can be used and understood, it demonstrates NIH's investment. So I think that's a really great message. The one thing that came through, there's questions on AI, but I think I'll come back to AI in just a second. There's this community theme for each of you, and what each of you said in different ways. When Keith was talking, he talked about those workshops for the platforms and infrastructure and what it meant to actually be fair and provide services to researchers. And then, of course, we saw that very strongly in USGS, not only with the FAIR roadmap, but also the community for data integration and that really core community component that helps make everything work. And then NIH comes about it a little differently, but also working in community. You're just distributed in a different way. And the thing you all said was that you had to bring in others, that it wasn't just the informatics folks that were needed to get the work done. You had to actually help others. And if we could perhaps start with Keith and talk about, that critical piece of engaging beyond just a basic informatics community and what that meant to actually make culture change happen and adoption happen.
Yes, yeah, thanks, Shelley. Yeah, I agree. I think I saw it in all three presentations. It's definitely something we've run up against in Australia, is that in the end, you're expecting the outputs to be fair, but you can't expect a researcher to do that all on its own. So there are a number of stakeholders you need to get on board, and we've found, as such, that's not hard. The actual complicated bit there is untangling what fair means in practice and getting a good understanding of what role each different stakeholder can play in that space. And sometimes that role was actually quite, it could be simple things. So talking to a research infrastructure facility, and they mentioned that they had no control over what the researcher finally did with their research data and what they did with that research data. And I said, well, you can actually just provide them with a recommendation. Even though you can't oblige them to take a certain action, you can provide them with a recommendation and a place, a suggested repository to put the data in, for example. And they went, oh yes, of course, that's actually not that hard, and it's a great step in that process. So I think working through that with the community, I think has been very helpful to better understand what role everybody plays and what things people do in that space. And there is a lot of variation there, and a lot of that process was just listening and untangling what everybody does and where they can play a role in FAIR.
I think that's really critical. Like a little bit of, I think the word concierge was used in a different conversation today, kind of having a concierge service. So Viv and team and Fran, I see that your camera's on. I wonder if one of the three of you could talk about what it meant to bring in those other voices.
Well, I can start, and I'll just say that we do very little without the community in USGS right now. Like, that's kind of the foundation, because what ends up happening is we've discovered, if you just push things down from the top, so they're just policies, you gain more buy-in if you then get the community involved in how they might even implement those policies. So around FAIR, it's sort of a similar concept. Is like, you don't want to just say we're going to do FAIR. You want people involved in how are we going to get there and what is that value, and be able to see themselves in it in order to move it forward. So Leslie and Fran probably have some other comments as well.
One thing that Keith said really resonated with me, because when we had that workshop in which we had been strongly encouraged to broaden the different types of people who were there, and finally on the third day, we just sort of spontaneously divided ourselves into the different groups to say, what is our kind of in the kind of work we do for USGS, what is our role in FAIR, and what are the problems we're encountering? And from that, what do we want to ask USGS to do? So we had a policy group and a data producer group and a repository manager group, and I'm sure there was another one. And it was just really interesting to see the different perspectives people had and the different things they saw that were needed to make FAIR work.
Yeah. I was there. It was very enlightening. Susan, how are you guys coming at this concept around community? Because I know you have some others, a different sort of culture at NIH, and you've had to come at it with a different lens a little bit.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Of course, we have a really strong community within NIH by bringing together our institutes and centers and working together with the Office of Science Policy, as well as the Office of Extramural Research, all working towards that, developing and implementing the data management and sharing policy, which will become a real plan in a year, in just a few months. We're also working with our communities, both at the IC level, because there certainly are lots of communities that are feeding into and supporting our different institutes. So that, for example, the societies and the communities will also work together with us and with their members to help think about how you create a data management and sharing plan, how you create FAIR data, how you find repositories for sharing your data. So I'll call out one particular example because I've been working with them a little more extensively. It's the FAFSA community, where they've just launched this program called Data Works, where they're working with their members to answer questions about data sharing, creating a way to help researchers develop data management sharing plans, and working on other things such as a data challenge for data reuse and data sharing. And it does take a community of the funders and of the societies and of the communities such as RDA. So I think in this way, and through a network by interacting with many, many people at NIH, we are slowly starting to work with the communities to help them also instantiate fair data sharing.
Thank you for mentioning FAFSA. So that's Frank Krause, who's the CEO there, and both Chris Erdman's on the call here, and he's a colleague of mine, and both he and I have been helping that initiative, and it's really great to see societies jump in and try to help their members, and AGU is, of course, also doing that. So let's circle over to AI. This is a little technical, but both Keith and Susan mentioned AI ready, and I do know USGS is also interested in that as well, because there's such value in having that sort of an analytic tool available, and ability to take a look at data in these other ways to benefit. Keith, can you talk to that a little bit? What is it that ARDC is interested in AI ready?
So from our perspective, the data is really interesting for the future, and to enable that data intensive research future we are expecting. We also see the huge value for data in addressing societal challenges. But to do that, you'll need to bring together large masses of data, and large masses of quite varied data from varied sources. We're also looking at how data can be used to be translated. So research outcomes can be translated to the benefit of business and industry, and also to policy and government. So to enable that, the data needs to be in a form that can be effectively reused. And that's where AI and machine learning and data science comes in. I see FAIR as a first step in that process. I think making your data fair is a crucial step, so that machines can actually find the data and interrogate the data. I really liked Susan's slide, and I'm going to have to dig into that one. I have a new colleague on board, Nada Barathi, and he's working on the question of where does FAIR and where does machine learning, how do the two relate to each other, and how can FAIR enable data to be ready for AI and machine learning. So I really like that angle. I think FAIR on its own is a very good starting point, but I think there's also some inherent characteristics in the data, like the quality of the data and the values, etc., that need to be addressed to enable the data to be reused in AI and machine learning.
Great. Does anyone want to add anything else? I think that's pretty broad understanding across all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. Okay. All right. Well, we have 7 minutes left, and there's one question that I don't want to miss talking to you about, because we're here at RDA, and you are all members of the organizational assembly, and one of the reasons RDA asked the organizational assembly to host plenaries like this is to be able to talk about how we're leveraging RDA's capability to help our own organizations meet these goals. And you have all walked through yours in limited time, but nonetheless, these are very large goals that we have. And we're easily all together impacting the lives of well over 1 million, if not more, researchers just by the people on this plenary session. So just significant impact on the community broadly. And can you talk, each of you, about how we can coordinate across each other or leveraging RDA? I think maybe if we think about, common awareness or common community using RDA as a tool, if you could talk to that as what your expectations are or your hopes, so that we as an RDA community can rally behind that and figure out the best way to help these policies and roadmaps be successful. Would anyone like to go first?
Well, Well, Shelley, I can certainly start off by saying that I think that there's some really good work that's happening in RDA around data management plans and sort of computable data management plans and really instantiating fair data. That, you know, putting those concepts into real practice and then sharing those outcomes with each other so that we can iteratively improve, you know, where we are going with fair data and data sharing, I think is a good step forward. So, you know, the work that RDA is doing is certainly impactful, and sometimes we just have to try and pilot different ideas and then share the outcomes. And so that's, you know, one way that we can leverage the work of RDA and push it forward across, not just within any one funding agency, but across the globe, really.
Wonderful, wonderful. Yeah, Keith, I'm looking at you because I know that our work together in the Fair Data Maturity Model has really influenced what's happening at ARDC, and that's another leverage point. I wonder if you're thinking of others.
Yes, that one very small thing, and it's more at the detailed level, but very crucial in the whole process. As I'm working through with the communities and the partners, what does it mean to make data fair? One of the big things that keeps coming up is standards, and standards in disciplines and standards in approaches. And that's where it often sometimes grinds to a halt, and they say, well, actually, it doesn't exist yet for our discipline, or we don't have the standard we need for our discipline or area. And these are things that are not Australia specific. These are usually disciplines which are international, global. So I think that's one area where a Research Data Alliance can play an extremely valuable contribution in developing these standards and sharing them and getting agreement on these, so that it makes it easier for researchers and all the stakeholders involved to adopt those standards. And they're a crucial element in making the data fair, I think.
That's a great suggestion. That's a great suggestion. Would anybody at USGS like to add on to that? Yeah,
I'd add that when we were doing our roadmap, we kept saying things like, and figure out a way of including the samples, and figure out a way of including the software, and come up with some better standards for repositories. And it's just a roadmap. We didn't have to say what those were, but it's really nice to see RDA groups coming up with some really community standard guidance that when it's time to implement our roadmap, we can say, yes, go look at RDA.
Perfect. Perfect. So what should we call those? Like rest stops along the way, like pick up your software guidance here and pick up your sample guidance here. I just came out of the sample session. I know you were there too, Fran, and there's such really great work happening. Yep, physical samples. That's fantastic. So we have 2 minutes left, and I'm very heartened with all of this energy, and these are the efforts that are going to make really significant impact to help our researchers know what to do around data and software sharing and citation and reusability and all the things around fair and trust. And let's not forget care. We know that with that needs to also, as that is evolving as well, we'll need to include that. We at AGU, we are going to try to go after the discipline standards that we have in the domains. Leslie, she knows that. She's the chair of my advisory board. So she knows we're going to tackle that in 2022. We're not 100% sure how that's going to work, but we will definitely bring that back and share our pilots and experience, and to see if we can help others do the same. So thank you to everyone for coming. And if you have any additional questions, you know where everybody is. I encourage you to reach out and get in contact. And thank you all for everyone who spoke, for Keith and Viv and Leslie and Fran and Susan. Thank you so much. It's really great to have you all making such incredible strides individually and together. And it really does take a village.
Thank you.
Thank you.